Okay. So last time we spent the class kind of talking about the uh, kind of the differences between NS user defaults and a traditional database, and we talked about how NS user data defaults is kind of our it's an abstraction of just a flat file. Kind of makes life easier for us, but we need to understand how it actually works. So what I want to do today is I kind of want to wrap up the D20 Gaming Dice project. I'm going to do, we're going to turn things into an object, which we'd already started before, and then I'm going to give you a homework assignment that makes you take it across the finish line. So that should be kind of fun. I'll probably give you until Monday to finish the assignment because it could be somewhat time consuming. But you'll all just procrastinate. But at least you won't have any excuse. So what we want to do is we're going to come back in here right now and run this and just see where we're currently at in the big scheme of things. Okay, so I'm going to do like 25 D8, and right now it gives us our roll. If we hit details, it shows us nothing. I'm guessing we still we still have some save code in here somewhere. I want to hit details. Here's user defaults. Oh, that's right. Right at the end of class, I said we had to figure out what was going on. So let's look at this. Okay. So NS user defaults. We're getting our storage. Then we're creating a brand new dice roll. Well, we're trying to grab an existing dice roll called the roll from the data store, where dice roll is one of these guys. A number of sides, a quantity, and the current sum. So we build it with a number of sides and a quantity. So if we don't have a dice roll, if we pull it from the thing, pull it from the NS user defaults, then what do? We create the variable by allocating a dice roll, knit with num sides 5, add quantity 10, in quantity 10. So this will be a 10d5 roll as an object, even though we're not actually rolling it yet. We'll store it inside the roll, then we will store that object, the roll for key the roll, and synchronize. And I think we say in here, before it crashed, okay, so here's the error. Attempt to set a non-property list object, dice roll, as an NS user default value for the key the roll. What does that say about our objects? Now, we don't know what a property list is, but at the very least, we know that our dice roll must not be one of those. Does that make sense? So I can tell you a property list follows, let me show you an example of one here. Here's a plist. So this is an object based on a plist. It's a bunch of name value pairs. So my question here is, right now, we are not able to create a dice roll object and save that dice roll object, because dice rolls are not a property list. So it's not of appropriate type that we can save it to NS user defaults. Like we talked about last time, NS user defaults is a abstraction for a flat file, but in order for that abstraction to work, it has to only work on certain kinds of objects. It works on strings. It works on built-in objects because those are written in terms of plists. It works on NS mutable arrays and NS arrays for that matter. And it seems like it's not working on our own objects. Now, we can make it work on our own objects by converting our objects into plist format, but let's say we don't want to do that. What if I want to store information regarding a regarding a dice roll, where a dice roll is a num sides and a quantity. That's what it takes to build one of these guys. What if I wanted to store that? How would you store that information in a way that we've already seen NS user defaults can handle?
Do an array.
Okay, you could do an array. What would the array look like?
Have two buckets. The first one would be number of size, second one would be quantity, and integer.
Okay, so we can repurpose NS mutable arrays to hold two pieces of information. Bucket 0 is number of sides, bucket 1 is quantity. No harm, no foul. Okay, what if we, okay, so let's do that. Let's start off with that. So real quick here inside of dice roll, we made a display method, right? Yeah, display just shows number of sides. Here, and quantity, %d. All right, so we'll ask our dice to display itself. So go back to main. So when we pull our information out of our dice roll or out of our storage, we're not pulling it out as a dice roll. Coleslaw wants us to pull it out as an NS mutable array. And then if it exists, turn it into a dice roll, right? Now, more than likely, since it's an NS mutable arrays hold objects. What's our easiest way of storing two integers in an NS mutable array? Because that's what I need. I need a number of sides, and I need a number of and a quantity. So I need to store two integers in an NS mutable array. What would be the most convenient way, based on what we've done so far, for us to store two integers in an NS mutable array? Make them strings. Pretty similar answer to what we run into in Java, where Java is a string-based language. So if we can put something into a format of a string, we can easily get it back to an integer. Okay, and the same is true here. So what I'm going to do here, I'll just write this on another line here. So we're going to say NS mutable array, the dice roll parts, since we were talking about shooting somebody in the face. And I just want to make sure we're consistent. You see, we're using consistent lingo. Okay, so we're going to get the parts, and we're going to get that from storage, array for key, and let's call it the roll. Actually, let's call it the roll parts. Good enough. Okay, hold on. Something zigged when it should have zagged. There. All right, so we're going to get rid of this line because we're no longer storing one of those guys in there. Then we'll ask, if the dice roll parts is not equal to nil. If it exists, then what can we do? We can go ahead and we can create our dice roll. Correct? So we're going to have our variable here, dice roll, pointer called the roll. And we'll say the roll is equal to dice roll alloc init with num sides. Num sides for this would be the dice roll parts, object and index 0. So Paul, you wanted to have bucket 0 be our number of sides, right? So that gets us bucket 0, but it's going to get it, as of right now, as a generic NS object. So I need to turn that NS object into an NS string. Okay, so now I have the NS string version of that. And what am I going to do with the NS string version of that? I'm going to get its int value. Like that. So what that highlighted code does is it removes bucket 0 from our dice roll parts. It comes out as an NS object. We cast it to an NS string because it actually is a string because we know that's what we put in there. And then we ask that string to give us this integer value, its int value. Make sense? And we're going to use that as the number of sides portion of our constructor for the roll. Then I'm going to pass the same thing, but bucket 1. So I created my instance of dice roll from the 2 elements of my mutable array that I know I can store. So we are purposing our NS user defaults to hold the pieces of information associated with our dice roll. We're purposing it for that. And then we can rebuild it using those 2 pieces of information. Does that make sense? Now, would you say that this looks a little scary out here? I mean, once we walk through it, it's not that bad, but it looks a little complicated, doesn't it? So what I might do is this, and this is an example of why you might want to have multiple constructors for an individual object. So I'm going to go into diceroll.h, and we're going to have a second constructor. We're going to have one that takes in an array. Okay, so we're going to have a constructor that takes in an array called the parts. And then we'll go ahead and implement that constructor. So notice there's now 2 different ways to build a dice roll. And since this is a constructor, we'll always do the same first and last line. Okay. Now, what can I do? I can say num sides is equal to the NS string pointer version of the parts object at index 0. Whoa, that got nasty real quick. There we go. Int value. That's what num sides will be. Quantity will be the int value from bucket 1. All right, so I wrote the complexity inside my constructor. So my constructor, one of my ways I can build a dice roll is I can pass it a number of sides and I can pass it a quantity. But now another way I can build a dice roll is by passing it an NS mutable array where it knows that the number of sides is stored at bucket 0 and the quantity is stored at bucket 1. Okay? So given that, what I can do out here now that I've updated my dice roll, is inside main VC, instead of it looking scary like this, I could say init with array the dice roll parts. Does that make sense? Nothing's changed logically. All I've done is I've encapsulated that detail that was just there inside of this constructor. That's the point of object-oriented programming. Once we wrote it and we know it works, we wrote it right here, the details are in here, we know it works, we don't have to deal with them again. We can just say, hey, I'm going to pass you a 2-bucket mutable array and you're going to build the dice roll out of that. Now, as programmers, we are responsible for passing it an appropriate 2-bucket array. I mean, don't send it, recipes for lasagna inside of an array or something like that and expect to have, a magical dice roll created. But, in this case, we can represent a dice roll inside of with two integers inside of a NS mutable array. Does that make sense? So where does this connect to your other classes? Well, in the 250 class, which some of you were in, this connects to object-oriented programming. In the 470 class, this connects to data representation. We're representing a dice roll as a 2-bucket integer array. Well, 2-bucket string array. Does that make sense? We're just repurposing structures and storing things in an interesting way. Okay, so we will try. What's this guy complaining about? Unexpected identifier. Oh, didn't like that extra zig. Here we go. Oh, it's coming out as an NS array, so I need to turn it to an NS mutable array. All right, so I will try to retrieve my dice roll parts from the NS user defaults. Any way you cut it, I'm going to be building a instance of dice roll called the roll. If I did not have a dice roll parts, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a roll. Well, actually, this is if I did have it. If I did have dice roll parts, that is, it's not equal to nil, go ahead and generate my dice roll object using our new constructor. Otherwise, actually, I think I had some code down here for it. We'll just steal this line. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and create our dice roll. Okay. So if we found the parts, we will create our dice roll using the parts, print out the roll was found, and then display it. If it was not found, if this is the first time we're trying to store a dice roll inside of NS user defaults, then we'll go ahead and create a version of the roll using our normal constructor. Okay? Then we're going to say the roll was not found. We're going to write it for the first time. Now we need to write that guy to the to NS mutable or to an NS user defaults. Because I just built an object here, but I want to be able to retrieve that object next time through, right? Now, how do I store dice rolls inside of memory? How do I store dice rolls inside of NS user defaults? Do I store it as a dice roll object? Or do I store it as an NS mutable array? Store it as an array. Because we already proven to ourselves we can't store dice roll objects. So, in order to store this roll inside of our user defaults, I need to do what? I need to get a 2-bucket NS mutable array from our dice roll. Well, how would I do that? So I have a dice roll here, Simon. How would I turn this dice roll into a 2-bucket NS mutable array? And this is what dice roll looks like. And this is an advantage of looking at a header file, by the way. Right now you're looking at a summary of what dice rolls can do. I need to create a two bucket NS mutable array from this guy, right? What should bucket 0 be? Bucket 0 should be the number of sides. Bucket 1 should be the quantity. Those are the two pieces I need to extract. Right now I have no way of actually extracting those pieces. I'm storing those pieces, but I don't have a way of extracting them. So I could write a couple of getters. So I can do int get num sides. And I can write another one, int get quantity. This is in the .h, so now I need to go over to the .m and implement it. So that guy will return num sides. That's why it's called a getter. It gets the value of a variable. This one will return quantity. So now I've taught my object how to give me the number of sides and the quantity. So if I go back to main VC, and I need to create an NS mutable array version of the role, what can I do? Well, I need to create a new NS mutable array, right? NS mutable array, pointer. Actually, I already have an array, don't I? It's called the dice parts, the dice roll parts. Might as well use it. I'm only in here if it's empty, right? The dice roll parts is equal to NS mutable array alloc init. Dice roll parts, add object. So the first object I'm going to add is going to be the number of sides. How do I get the number of sides? I want the number of sides of the roll. The roll get num sides. But that guy is going to be an int. I need it as a string. How do I turn that guy into a string? Like this. So I have a constructor for the string class, which we've seen before. It allows us to create a formatted string. What's my string going to hold? Well, it's going to hold a decimal, an integer. So here's my placeholder. What decimal do I want it to be? I want it to be the roll get num sides. So now I have my number of sides as a string. Num sides. Now I can do the exact same thing for quantity. Roll get quantity. Okay, so these two lines get the number of sides as a string and adds it to my array. These two lines gets the quantity as a string, adds it to my array. Then what do? I'm going to say storage. What's the name of the roll parts? Set object. oh, the dice roll. The dice roll parts for, and no spaces, right? Roll parts. Synchronize. So this is how I store that guy in there. So I'm only inside of this else if the dice roll parts has nothing in it. So that means I can go ahead and I can give it a value. The value I'm going to give it is an empty NS mutable array. Then I'm going to get the string version of num sides, add that to the array. Then I'm going to get the string version of quantity, add that to the array. Then I'm going to store the array. Is it set object or is it set array? Yeah, set object. And then I'll synchronize the storage. Okay, now, again, I want to consider a pattern here. This, again, falls into this category of we are looking at some lines of code that look complex, right? My guess is most of you would have had trouble writing this. But we need to simplify this and think, what are we doing? I would say in the high 90 percentile, when we're writing code, we're doing the same crap over and over and over again. In this case, what are we doing? We're converting strings to ints and ints to strings. And shoving them into arrays. That's it. All this code, this heavy lifting right here, everything I have highlighted right there was all about building a string version of an int. That's it. It's just long-winded. Just says, give me a string that has this int in it. It's equivalent to the Java version of this. You know, concatenate 5 onto the empty string. That's what it's essentially doing. Okay, but still, inside of main VC, this starts looking complex, doesn't it? We don't want this much detail in here. So what are we going to do? Well, I can do a couple different things here. I'm going to steal all this code. We're going to go into our dice roll. We're going to create a method that returns an NS mutable array called getAsArray. We'll go ahead and write this. So I created a method here inside of dice roll that creates an NS mutable array, creates our num sides as a string, using self, using this guy's num sides. I could have also just said num sides, like that. Same exact thing I did before, and then in the end, I return the NS mutable array. So now we can ask a dice roll to give us himself as a mutable array. Just like we can ask a dice roll constructor to build himself from an NS mutable array. So now we have new ways of building and getting dice rolls. Come back out here to main. So the object I'm going to set is the roll get as array. I have a method now that does all that scary stuff for me. Details are still there. It's still scary, but it's back here, behind closed doors, where we don't have to look at it. We wrote it, we tested it, it works. We didn't actually test it, just trust me. Okay. Go back to main. All right, so again, what am I doing here? I'm saying if we're going to try to get the roll parts, if I find the roll parts, then we'll go ahead and build our dice roll from the roll parts, spit out to the screen that the roll was found, and then tell the roll to display itself. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and build a brand new roll using its other constructor, the num size and the quantity. Print out to the screen the roll was not found, writing it for the first time. Then we'll set an object. Which object? The roll get as array. So the NS mutable array version of the roll. And who gave us that? The roll gave us it. We just asked him for it. So we gave him that ability. We wrote that ability into the roll. For key the roll parts, and then we'll synchronize. Oh, hold on. It's yelling at us up here because we already have variables named num size and quantity. So let's just call this guy NS and Q. Okay. So now when we run this, first time, we should have no first time we should have no dice roll. So we'll build it. 52 D8, hit details. The roll not found, writing it for the first time. And we know we wrote a dice roll for a 5-sided die 10 times. That's what we hard coded in there. Okay? The roll was not found, writing it for the first time. We'll go ahead and stop our program now. We'll run it again. 56 D6 details. Ruh-roh. Everybody relax. I probably named it something different 2 different times. Well, that's not what I want to be in. I want to be in main VZ. Not that I hadn't already clicked it. Okay, NS user defaults. Get array for key the roll parts. Not found. lowercase t. It's testing you, Simon. You failed. All right, so we got to do this again. Okay, so there's our not found, stored correctly. We'll run it again. Oh, it doesn't matter. There's our found, 5. It's kind of bastardized quantity a little bit. But this is street slang. So we used an NS mutable array to represent our dice roll. That makes sense? So what we want to be able to do, now taking this as our starting point, we want to create, I got to go into Angel here. Actually, let me do something that you'll appreciate. I got to see where I'm storing that folder. I'll give you this, my current version of code as a starting point. D20 gaming dice. Who even knows where I put this? What's it? Aha! This one right here. All right. All right, so I'll zip that up. Okay. Using the attached file as a starting point, add a button to main VC to store the last dice roll as a favorite. You should also add a button for roll favorite so that the next time you open the app, you can click the button and it will re-roll the favorite roll. Note that you will have to finish implementing dice roll by moving the roll code we are currently using in main VC into the dice roll object. That way you could, so you can ultimately tell an instance of dice roll to roll itself. And this is content, right? Is our content link. It's kind of not how I want it. I want like alphabetized. It was on the bottom of the screen? Okay, thanks. Okay, and I'll give you until Monday to finish that. Okay? Make sure you ask questions. It's not as hard as you might think it is. A lot of it's the same patterns. Strings to ints to ints to strings, and taking what's already there and repurposing it for your own uses. All right, questions about what I'm asking you to do? And you'll notice that we have this streaming lecture on YouTube now. I've been uploading all lectures on YouTube instead of Vimeo now. So today's lecture will be up on YouTube. So I have both links there. Just figure it out. All right. Questions, comments, concerns, bribes. All right. I'll see you guys on Wednesday, and we'll start looking at our new project.